obviously this conference is all about doing business brilliantly, and I'm personally a big believer that technology is increasingly a big part of that picture. So this session today, titled with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek title here, with do I need an app to do that brilliantly? But what we want to think about today is how to identify opportunities for software and technology in your business, and think about how you might integrate software into a roadmap that might take you into being more brilliant at what you do. So just to introduce myself quickly, my name is Scott Gulliver. I am the director of Fluff Software based here in Swindon. We're a software agency, and I've been creating software commercially for about 13 years now, and developing software systems of all shapes and sizes, and really working closely with companies to identify where top-line technology can make an improvement and really getting them from idea to solution. At Fluff, we create digital products and software solutions for our clients. We combine things from design, development, and strategy, and bring everything together to get real change in businesses happening. We break down technology and software into simple steps and help companies to get started with software. And I hope today is a little bit of a way to show you about how we go about doing that. And so when we start with companies, we take almost everyone through a similar process to what I'm going to be highlighting today, which is really actually making the software and technology really the second part of the question. And the first question with any change that we make in our business is what are we making the change for? So the first part of what we like to do is an evaluation, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, evaluating where we can use software or technology in our companies. And all of the tools, all of the options, all of the things we're going to be discussing today, it's my belief that they apply to small one-person companies and startups, as well as large enterprises. And I think there is a misunderstanding with software that it needs to be a huge thing that you spend lots of money and time on, but actually small improvements in software and technology can make real big changes in your company. Obviously, technology and software are such broad statements, they're such broad words, and it's useful as we go along today to think about how it can specifically apply to your business. Really consider about each slide about how we can take what we're learning here and apply it to our companies. So, technology. Obviously, the options in technology are growing every day. I've thrown a few options out there that we see quite a lot talked about at the moment. Things from building new mobile apps to building online learning to creating booking systems for companies. There are just so many routes you could go about, whether it's creating new products for your customers or whether it's internal changes that might help your internal teams to do things more efficiently. With so many options, how would you possibly know where to start? Which would you choose as an option to go forward with? Would you develop an app for your customers to use? Could you create a simple booking form on the website to help people make their own appointments? A lot of these introduce things like custom software development, but also a lot of off-the-shelf solutions. And again, there's just such a variety of options. It can be overwhelming to know which is the best way to go. The guiding light for a lot of this is to start with our business. And again, as with any change, whether it's software or a financial decision or anything really, personnel, it could be anything in the company, we want to start with what we're changing and why. And so we want to really identify what the business goal is that we're going to try and address with technology. So looking at where we are today, with identifying where we're at now and where we want to be and what we want to be the company forward to, can help to identify the gap of where we want to use software to solve that. And there are lots of tools to do this, a little bit outside the scope of this talk. Things like SWOT analysis are a great way to identify those gaps. And actually using SWOT with a kind of technology lens on it can really help to identify what competitors are doing in the landscape and drive some ideas from there as well. And you want to couple that with where you want to be as well. You might identify opportunities and threats, but also what's your vision for the company? Is it about getting more clients? Is it about capturing a new market? Maybe increasingly today, helping to guard against tech startups and technology first companies. And again, I think this applies to all companies, both small and big. And the smaller ones specifically could be providing opportunities to make better use of time, for example. So could it be providing your customers with more self-serve opportunities to reduce the bottlenecks of having limited people involved? And obviously for large companies, usually bigger numbers, bigger teams can obviously roll out much more complex solutions as well. And so in understanding where we want to go and what problem we're going to be trying to solve, this is a quote I really love from a guy called Scott Cook, which is, instead of focusing on the competition, focus on the customer. And this is, again, something to keep in mind as you're going through this type of process, because it can be really interesting to see what other people are doing, and certainly for looking at ideas and what's out there in the market already. That's really interesting. But each company is really their own company, and they will speak to customers in their own way. So you know your customers best, and actually there's probably something that your customers are looking for that they're not getting elsewhere that you can really start to capitalize on. And it really is the guiding light for finding our way through the kind of vast amount of options that software can bring about. Really understanding our customer is essential here, learning about what they want, how to solve their problems, and that all starts to be really key in developing and finding a problem that matters to them, and then finding a solution that can help solve that. And the key to successful software, we think about successful software often as being really technically well implemented, but actually a lot of the time it's much more about finding the right problem that we're solving with technology, even if it's with a mediocre solution, than finding the best tech for the wrong problem. We see that so often. People have great ideas about what they want to implement, but if it's put onto the wrong problem, it's not going to generate a return, and it's often a bit of a waste of time in going through the process to begin with. So we tend to use a lot of different tools, but the one we always come back to is personas. And so personas are a way of capturing key information about a target market. So if you were to look at your current customers today that you have in your organization, personas are a way of essentially capturing key information about an imaginary individual that represents that group. And for many companies, there may well be different types of personas if we're looking at different target markets. And the reason that these tools are so essential is that they, for one, capture lots of information about where they're currently finding their information, where they're currently finding their solutions, but also keyly, what are their problems? What could we solve for them that would improve their lives? And in relation to the problem we're looking at, what are their pain points related to that? What is really causing them pain day to day that we might be able to solve for them? And so with any persona-driven things, there's a lot of research you can do, but also you may well understand your customers pretty well already, and actually just going through the process of putting yourselves in the shoes of your customers is a really great way to take a first step in this direction. And so the other thing we like to do with these personas that's a little bit non-standard here is especially apply a technology lens. So in this example of this sheet here, in the bottom left there, we've got a box to capture information related to how they are related to technology. How competent are they at using technology? How do they find information at the moment? Do they use technology for that? What other technology solutions are they using at the moment? And all of these start to form a really great basis of information from which you can start to think about which technology options might be best to put in front of them for yourself. Assumption mapping is another really essential process that we like to take people through. And so at this point where we're starting to look at if software is an applicable solution for your company, really breaking down what assumptions you have about your customers is key here. And over time, we do get into the habit of having assumptions about our customers. We start to know a lot about them, but we also start to assume things about them through patterns of behavior, through feedback. And so taking the opportunity to really map out what things we assume, and then putting them on a scale like we have here, from things on the left, which might be hard assumptions to validate, things that are really opinionated, for example, might be difficult, through to the vertical scale, which is the importance. So how important will this assumption be in improving it out to the success of any solution that we put in place for the problem we're trying to solve? And so the things in the top right hand corner there, your important and easy to validate, are kind of the low hanging fruit that you want to attack first. And the reason this is important is because we've seen software projects in the past where people pour a lot of money into assuming things about their customers, assuming that they will want the latest app, for example, assuming that they will want to see information online. But until you start to prove out those things, it can be really difficult. You can end up throwing away a lot of money and time in developing solutions to find out that they were the wrong path to begin with. And this is why we like to take this step back and really apply some of these good business practices, even before we go into any technical components. And this really helps to kind of build that level of success before we've even started any investment. And so, as we said, understanding the customer is really key here, and getting feedback is a really great way to do that, speaking one-on-one with customers. And actually, for smaller companies, this is a really great opportunity. It's quite often the smaller companies are much more direct with their customers. They might usually have a much better relationship on a one-on-one setting. And so there may be an opportunity there to sit down with one or two of them and get them in a friendly setting to help work out what the problems are. I've put a book on here, The Mum Test, which is a really great book that we found to ask really good questions in terms of getting feedback. This is especially true through the lens of technology. So quite often when we have an idea, for example, for an app for our company, we may take that to individuals and start speaking to them about how relevant the app might be to them. Whereas actually, the problems that we're trying to solve are the more important things here. So asking good questions about the root problems are the more interesting ones at this point. And so learning to talk to your customers and getting the right feedback is really essential here, uncovering the kind of root problems and the desires rather than discussing specific ideas that people might have. Because ideas are great, but ultimately there usually are other ways to go about achieving the same goal. It's more about uncovering those root problems that they have in the first place. And again, group feedback is great here. If you get feedback as well, distributing it to your team is really essential. Not only the people that may be involved in the future software project, but also it's a really great routing of your services as well. To be able to go back to a team and give them real world feedback from your customers is essential. So a lot of business activities there. And we use a couple of tools now to basically start summarizing the business problem that we're trying to solve. And it really is a business problem. Whenever we talk about technology solutions, we're looking to align them with the business problems and the business goals. So with good goals, it's important to know how you're going to be measuring it and making sure that it's achievable. So something like the SMART goal framework that we've got on the left there is a pretty common way to start building these out. And the reason that we want this is because, as we'll learn over the rest of the session, we are going to be iterating a lot and coming up with lots of ideas about how to solve this problem. And things can go down rabbit holes pretty quickly. So having a very clear idea of the goal we're trying to solve, how we're going to measure it, making sure we know when we want to save it, to solve it by, these are all important foundations to make sure that we're heading in the right direction and we don't go off course too much. User stories are another great way to capture some of this data and the requirements around what we're trying to do. So on the right here, we've got an example, and they're quite a simple concept, but they are quite powerful as well. So they follow this as I want, so that format. So we capture requirements here. As an example, if we had a cafe and we found that customers were finding it hard to know which coffees to buy from us, for example, and we wanted to capture that as a requirement that we needed to solve with potentially with software, we may capture that as a regular customer, I want to know which coffees are new in for this month so that I can make a quick decision before my commute. And what they help to do is put the requirement from the user's point of view. It helps people on a team to know why it's important, to know if they're thinking about solutions, what they might align it to. And they're a really powerful way just to turn requirements around back to the user's point of view. And we find that really powerful in the software world. So once we've done that and we know what problem we want to solve, we can start researching. And so researching the existing marketplace is a good step to do this. You may well have a good idea about what your customers are looking for at the moment, or what they do, sorry. And so having a look at the competition, not only in your direct competitors that you work with at the moment, but especially if you're moving into more of a technology-focused world, what are other more tech-focused firms doing at the moment? So getting a lay of the land is really important here. And when you're investigating these existing solutions, you may well find competition, but also potential solutions that you might even use right away to help your customers. That can be a really great way to bring extra value to your customers or clients from day one. And you never know, there may even be potential partnerships in there as well. If you have a service that's been running for a long time and there's a tech solution out there that could use some of your input, then you may well find potential conversations happening there as well. And it's important that with anything that you find in the market, that you compare it specifically with your customers in mind. Bear in mind that every business is unique, and you really want to ask the question of what can you bring that's different or solves that problem better with your good grounding in what you do as a business today. And so with the idea of the problem we're trying to solve and what's out there in the marketplace, the next thing is to figure out how software might get there. And this is something we'll be looking at in more detail in the next segment. But software can be the plumbing required to develop a really great experience to your customers and to solve the problems. As with all software, it's the kind of unseen magic behind the scenes, but really it's the experience that we want to focus on first and foremost. And hopefully through the good research and the understanding that you've done with your customers, you'll be well placed to think about where technology might start to solve those problems for you and to open up doors. And so if we go back to this slide again that we saw at the start, hopefully we can see now that with the research that we've done, it's much easier to actually start considering which of these and all of the other options out there might be the most impactful to our business for today. So it's all about business goals and understanding of our customers and knowing what's already out there. And that will really help us to start understanding how we might start choosing a path forward. And we'll still need to carefully consider our approach, which we'll consider in the next part. But I firstly just wanted to pause for a minute there and listen to any questions that you've got. Please feel free to put those in the chat and we'll talk about those. And so while we're waiting for any chats that might come through, a few questions that we normally get around the evaluation stage of things. So the first question we get quite a lot of is, how long does it take to do this type of research? I think quite a lot of the time when people think about implementing changes, they want to go about it quite quickly. And what I would say is that these stages can take as long as they take, but also the more you put deadlines and structure around it, the better. So we tend to complete these type of end-to-end evaluating the problem and doing the research kind of phases within about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the complexity of the problem. And that can be a great length of time. Now, obviously, your team may have other priorities, and that's something worth considering. But as with anything, run this as a proper project, run this as something that you want to do. And especially if you can find a business problem or business goal to align it to, hopefully that will give good weight into why this should be prioritized alongside everything else that you're doing. And another question that we often get asked, or where people get stuck, is how to find options that are already out there in terms of competition. And something that's worth considering in this instance is it's worth putting yourself again in the shoes of your customer. So find solutions like they would. So if, for example, they are likely to go and Google for something to find a solution to their problem, identifying their problem and then Googling it yourself will take you to what they might find. And that can be a really great way of finding those sorts of things. The persona, any top tips on identifying them, Nigel? That's a great question. Again, probably something that's a little bit outside of the scope of what we tend to do. But what I would say is be really specific. A problem we do have quite a lot is that we tend to go into personas and they're quite watered down because we're speaking to too many people. As a kind of development company, we'd much rather have 4 or 5 different personas and know that they all individually need to be we need to meet the goals of all of them rather than have one kind of watered down persona. So being really specific on those personas is usually quite key. Fantastic. So let's go back into the slides. So the next step is to really plan our approach, and software is very different today than it was even 10 or 20 years ago. And the reason that the first step, and we spent so long on understanding what the goal we wanted to achieve, was just because software these days is less about having a very concrete plan and delivering that over several months, and much more about testing very quickly and learning as we go. And so a slide that I like to put in here, and something that I always like to think about, is that the same thinking applied to our business or our solutions leads to the same solutions and ultimately leads to us having the same problems. So iterative development is really the way that we go about breaking the cycle of this. And it really can be a hard cycle to break. So this type of process, as a software company, we're very used to working this process, but it does go against the grain of a lot of companies. So it's worth really trying hard to, as much as you can, ingrain this type of thinking with the software project as you go. But we're going to start exploring some practical steps about going from your desired goal to actually getting the results in place that you want. So agile is a term that we use in software a lot, and it really is, at its very core, all about working very iteratively and testing and learning as we go. And really testing is the key part of that. We should be under no pretenses that we know what the final solution will be at the start. We may have an idea about what might work, but we very quickly want to learn as quick as possible what is going to work and learn from our users about what we need to do in the future. In contrast to this is the waterfall method, which used to be used in a lot of software projects, which was very much about learning as much as we could at one point in time, and then building potentially for months or even years on projects, and then finally releasing a built solution and learning very quickly whether it was successful or not, with all that investment involved. So design thinking is something that predates or comes before the software development stage, but it's very agile in its way. So this really underpins a lot of the early design work or idea work that we're going to think about. And we'll go through each of the steps in a second, but they're quite a useful methodology to follow when you're thinking about technology internally. So one of the other things to mention with this is that we have 5 steps here, and they are very conceptual, but they're quite well defined as well. But the how you go about actually achieving these can be totally up to you, and really think about how it might work for your company. So to explain the steps we'll run through, we're going to do this through the lens of a fictional company. I always find this a little bit easier than just talking about the theory of the steps. So in this example, we've got Fondant Accounting here, a small accountancy based in Wiltshire, a team of 4. And they have identified that they're losing more customers to self-serve options like Xero and QuickBooks out there at the moment. So they've really taken the time to identify their customers. They've been through some of the evaluation steps, but now they need to plan how they're going to use technology to solve that problem. So the first step on the design thinking cycle is empathize. And we've done a lot of this already. We've done this good work so far in the evaluation step, but really understanding what our customers are thinking today. And so with the tools that we've discussed, like Xero and QuickBooks, we know that this company don't want to have to set up those systems. They've gone out and got feedback from their customers, and the feedback has been along the lines of, we like the personal touch with your company. They want up-to-date information, which they're not currently getting from the company at the moment. But actually, for a lot of their customer base, even though they know they're losing some customers to Xero and QuickBooks, the other options like those can seem too difficult to get on board with. And a frustration that they have is that they're always waiting for someone to answer the phone. So all of this information starts to build up a really great picture of what the customers are thinking at the moment. So the step 2 is to go into what we call define, and this is about really capturing or summarizing what we've learned in the empathize step. And again, we're coming back to our user story format here to capture some of that. So we're taking a lot of that feedback and we're just moving them into requirements now. So to break down a couple of those examples, we've got, as a small business owner, I want to have up-to-date accounts, have up-to-date access to my forecasted accounts so that I can make decisions around purchases. So this is something that we know the accountancy doesn't already have, but we've identified through that feedback that the customers would really like at this point. Another one is, as a small business owner, I want to quickly refer to the latest tax rates without needing to speak to an advisor, so that I can view the information whenever I need to. And the accountancy at the moment, if you wanted to get that information and someone to speak to, you would need to pick up the phone and have that long wait, as we've already identified. And what these start to do is form a bit of a backlog of goals that we want to achieve, any solution that we put in place. So the next step is to generate lots of ideas, is to think about those set of requirements and think about a way of being able to meet them. And as with any idea session, and the agile principle in kind of at its core as well, no idea is a bad one here. We want to try and generate lots of ideas and put them all against the wall, and we'll decide pretty quickly what makes sense. And throughout this process, because we want the cycles to be quite short, we don't want to be held up in the ideate stage for weeks at a time. You know, we want to make sure that we can start picking things and learning really quickly. It can help to keep momentum here by having key decision makers involved and really making them the authority on deciding things. Ultimately, if we were to pick something that's 80% feels like a good enough sort of solution and test it, that's a really great way of moving forward, rather than spending months at this stage working out what is the perfect option. And this applies as much to physical products, to digital solutions, as much as to in-person services. Any ideas here, they don't need to be technology or software specific. It's all about just ideas to solve the problem. So if we go to this example, we've got, to solve those requirements, they could go as far as building a mobile app. They could just add their tax rates to their website. Maybe that'd be a quick way of fixing that problem. They could outsource their first-line inquiries to an offshore call center to get that wait time down. Maybe that would be a quick way to do it. So the idea here is to throw as many ideas at the wall with as many people as you can, and then get a key decision maker to pick a path forward to test. And so in this instance, they decided actually that they really want to make a step change in their organization. They're going to build a mobile app to have a lot of the information and some self-serve options in there. Step 4 in the design thinking stage then is to prototype. And prototyping can seem like a daunting prospect, especially with something like an app. That can be a really big thing to prototype. But actually, we really want just to get to a proof of concept at this stage. And by proof of concept, we mean something that looks enough like the real thing that we can get real world feedback and decide whether it's the right path or not. The back end or how we implement that can be totally messy as long as it looks kind of like the final thing to the user. And by looks like, it doesn't have to be final designs, but just the process of going through it. So in this top example here, we've got some wireframes, which are actually normally good enough to take people through the process of. You can go as simple as putting pictures in front of people, even drawn wireframes, and having them physically click with their finger as if it was a kind of working phone and then move the wireframes. We've seen that done before. You can go as far as to use software packages, which will create an app-like experience. And again, it really is about what works for your team. If you've got designers in-house that are doing animations or logo design or branding, or even a marketing team, maybe they would be quite useful for developing images that look like wireframes. So really use what resources you've got internally. And the key here is just to spend as little money, time, resource as possible to test our assumptions. And so from there, we go into our final step in the cycle, which is to test it. And we use that prototype that we've got and put it in front of users. And so in this example, they've created a prototype of an app. They've got some good feedback already. So they really like the charts the users did. They didn't really understand what to do at the login screen. So that's something that might need to be ironed out as a feature. They loved having access to the tax rates, but they still needed to ring up to know which one applied to them. So there's either some missing information there, or maybe there's some flawed concept in how they're showing that. And again, this is all great feedback without really much investment at this point. Learning here is the most essential thing. Even if we discount things at this point, even if we learn that the app actually was the totally wrong way to go, that's a great bit of feedback, and we can already discount that assumption that we made that an app was the right way to go. And it really is a cycle. So we want to make sure that we're looping through this continually until we get to a solution that we feel like we have confidence in. And so you look at other companies, things like Netflix, they are always iterating. And the reason, a large part of the reason of that is because they follow these types of cycles internally. They're all about pushing features out there, learning very quickly and changing, adapting as they go. And that's how they stay at the forefront of their industries. The design thinking cycle, the last thing to say about it is it should always be through the lens of the user. And hopefully we've shown that through the steps in the example there. But it really is about making sure that we focus on the user, that we build a solution that solves the problem for them and ultimately drives back to our business goal to solve that as well. Now, I think I said a while ago that you can go down some rabbit holes with this. It can be easy to go off track. So in terms of staying on track, some really good things that can help here. For one is just having a clearly defined value proposition or goal that you're trying to solve. So one of those two, making sure that anything you're doing is aligned to those will help keep you on track. As things do change, and they will, you'll learn and you'll adapt as you go. Having an evolving kind of shared vision somewhere internally that everyone can see what the latest feedback is, why we've made decisions, why we're not going down certain routes, that can be a really great document to help keep everyone aligned. And the final thing is to align with the business direction. Ultimately, you want to make sure that something, unless there's going to be a huge step change in the business, it has to work with the business at the end of the day. So any ideas that you're coming up with, once you're learning about them, they probably do need to align with where the future of the business is going as well. That can really help have buy-in with kind of the C-suite or a board, and keep things on track there as well. And the final slide of this section, we'll go into this in a little bit more detail in the next section, but is to say that once we've created a plan and we've got an idea of what we want to create to solve our goal, the development of that is just as iterative as the design thinking cycle. We go from concept to longer term roadmaps and visions, and we'll cover that in a second. But yeah, we're never done learning, I guess is the summary of this slide. We're always moving forward to releasing slowly, to learning quickly, and adapting as we go. So in terms of planning and generating a good plan for the development of something, I'd love to hear any questions you've got on that part, and I'll pause here for a few minutes just while we cover those. And again, while we're waiting for the chat to come through, a few questions we normally get asked here. So one is any tips people have on generating ideas. So quite often with smaller companies, it can be difficult, especially with one-person companies. It can be difficult, especially if the person thinks they're not creative, which I think is a fallacy for most people. I think we're all very creative in our day-to-day roles. But one great way to generate ideas is to get external people involved. You may be able to get focus groups together from your customers. That might be a good way to do it. You might be able to get friends and family even, as long as you've given them enough context, that can be really useful. And context is a funny thing as well, because as long as you are the decision maker at the end of the day, even if there are ideas that don't align with the context, you can obviously discount this for certain reasons, but also you may get something on the periphery of what you're trying to do from someone who has a very different background to you that might be able to give you some really creative ideas there. And then the other thing to think about is how do you plan for something like when this is going to be finished? We keep talking about cycling forever. It doesn't need to be forever. And ultimately that goal is the thing we will come back to. So as with the plan and also the development of it, we will eventually know based on our SMART goals once we have achieved those goals. And beyond that point is a question of whether it makes sense for further investment. And Nigel, thanks for the question. Yeah, if you have to choose a platform for an app, iOS or Android, where do you start? There are increasingly more and more cross-platform development languages. So we tend to build almost all of our apps in a framework called React Native, which actually builds for both Android and iOS. So increasingly, it's less about a huge decision cost as to whether you're going to have one or the other or both. And actually, they're getting much more cost-effective now to build for both in the first place. I mean, in terms of deciding what best platform, it again comes back to the customer. So are the majority of your customers on iOS? Will the majority be looking in the App Store? Will the majority be on Android? And it's increasingly getting more of a 50-50 split all the time. But again, you will know your customers best, and even asking them or doing some polls in that area might help you identify which one to start with. Hope that helps. So the final section then. So it's all about now putting this into place. So the important thing as we go is to make sure that our goals are being met and that we're getting closer towards our goals. And the importance of this is really to start informing the next steps and future decisions as we go. So measuring is a really important part of this as we start to develop. And we don't just measure at the end, of course. We, as I mentioned, we develop almost all software these days using agile principles, which mean that we can develop small and build as we go. And the key part of that is to move from our proof of concept, which may well have been our prototype, and move into what we call a minimum viable product, or MVP. And the difference between these is, whereas the proof of concept solely existed to prove that the concept was even worth pursuing, the minimum viable product should be something that you can launch with, you can go public with for version 1. That customers can really use and interact with. And this is an important first step because it forms the foundation for any future development pieces. An MVP scope is really one of the most important things that I think we tend to get involved with from an agency point of view. We tend to add value into customers with. And the reason is because I think a lot of us see MVPs as this big thing. We need to release all these features for it to possibly be worth it to the customer. But actually, you can get pretty creative in cutting back the scope of what you might develop for an MVP. Really, the thing you're looking for one, is that it delivers a great experience from day one so that you don't put people off. And the second is that it has enough difference in it that it makes sense as its own individual app. So if you're building an app that everybody else has developed as well, for one, there's the question of why you're doing that, but then also there's probably something different in there, and that may well be the thing to focus for MVP. But having this MVP is really important. That will be the first point where you'll really start learning based on feedback as to whether it's going down the right path or not. And so from that MVP stage, just to cover this cycle again, it's very similar to the design thinking cycle where we go through planning, designing. So planning is planning which feature we're going to develop next, designing that feature, building it, testing it. And testing is really from a does it work, but also how effective is it point of view, and then review. So once it's been pushed out into the world, that feature or even the initial MVP is how well is it being received by people? Do we need to adapt? And that feeds right back into planning again. That will inform, is the next feature that we have planned to begin with, is that even important anymore? Should we prioritize something else? Do we need to go back and change some things? And again, we're continually learning as we go and continually measuring. So an important point here is that we want to, with our review stage, really measure as well, come back to our goal and see how well we're achieving our original vision and how much we're aligning towards that. Now, there are lots of ways to measure that as well. So once we already developed our SMART goal and our measurables that we want to start measuring, when we have something in terms of software out there, it can be quite hard sometimes to join the dots between that piece of software and the results it's having on the business. But there are lots of ways to do it. So feedback is one. It's a bit of an intangible way, but by getting feedback, you'll get an idea of roughly whether you're moving towards your overall vision for the company. And that can be through directly talking to people. It can be through looking at reviews, and reviews are a really interesting way, and ratings, of course, as well, especially with the app stores and other methods of getting an idea of whether we're improving on what we're doing according to the user or not. But it's worth always taking that with a pinch of salt and making sure that they aren't just reviewing, well, for one, that you're getting in front of the right customers, but also that they're reviewing things as you see the company moving forward. So you can also measure each feature. I mean, you can go as granular as you want. You could have a look at the chat application within your feature and decide whether that's working, whether that's meeting the goal of helping to improve customer communication, for example. You can really go as narrow as you want in here. And with feedback, one thing that we find is once you've launched your MVP, your version 1, that people are usually quite invested in giving you lots of great feedback. And feedback is really essential. It's kind of the lifeblood of an ongoing product. So it's key to make sure that you open up channels for people to give you feedback. But the other important counter side to that is to make sure that when you are getting feedback from people, that it's going somewhere that's relevant, it's being captured somewhere where you can actually action that feedback and do something with it. So we normally have someone in a bigger team, it's called a product owner, who looks after some piece of software. And it will often be their job to start collating feedback and manage what we call a backlog, essentially a list of features that or even ideas that we may develop at some point. But having someone with the organization that can do that role is really key. And obviously for a one-person team, that makes total sense to be the person that developed it and is running the project. So there are lots of ways to do this with software. We've got a couple of examples here for a project that we ran, where we've got a backlog here on the left. So a list of features purely prioritized from highest to lowest. And there's stuff at the top that we desperately need to get done. It may be breaking bugs. It might be a new feature that we know we need to roll out to start meeting our goal next quarter. And down at the bottom, there'll be low value things. There may be things that are cosmetic that don't really make a huge difference, but could be improved at some point. There'll be some ideas in there that we just haven't got around to really piecing out yet, or some ideas that we don't know really what the value related to that is. And almost all of these are prioritized, not just on why we think it's useful, but really based on the business value. And you can really get as far as a kind of score or percentage on that front, if that helps for you. But again, always aligning this back to the business is really key. And certainly for larger teams, this type of relating every piece of work that's going to be done back to the business impact and the goal impact can be a really great way of signifying value and the moving forward of a product in that way. And then gathering feedback is another useful thing. So on the right here, we have a piece of software which we use quite often to get feedback. And it's quite nice because it allows people to upvote things. It allows people to see feedback that everyone else has got, to comment on that feedback. But having an open channel for people to feedback on, especially if it's not an app and you don't have access to things like the reviews and the other things that are in the store natively, even for a website, for example, having some way that people can feedback and give you ideas or insight can be really powerful. And these software options are very much built for software teams, but it can be as simple as having a sheet in Excel, which is a list of features or ideas that you prioritize. Having some way just to keep an order of all the ideas and feedback that you've got is a really powerful way to move things forward. And we mentioned this before, but it really is about measuring from our SMART goals. So those goals that we had at the start, the business goals that we had at the start, we want to track our impact with relation to those over time. And this is especially important with those slower burning goals. So it's important to see small progress building, because quite often with software solutions, it's not an overnight change. especially when you're looking to onboard new users or get a user base up or go into a new market. It's going to be a slower thing. So seeing that small progress building can be a great indicator that things are at least on the right track. And there are lots of ways to do this. You really want to, again, go back to what you're measuring in that SMART goal. So if you're giving away a free app that's got content on it, maybe it's the actual course, paid course signups at the back of that you want to track. Maybe that's the business impact here. User counts are always interesting. They form the basis of some level of knowledge on who's using the app, or at least how many people are using the app. But until you dig into that, it can be hard to know whether they are people that are just using it once, whether they're people that are even your customers. So it's worth really digging into the analytics of user counts and the people that are using it. And again, even with ratings and reviews, that same thing holds true. At a high level, they give you some indication of how things are going. But until you dig into them, it's really hard to know exactly what those numbers mean, if that makes sense. And of course, there are other ways of doing it. So customer satisfaction scores, revenue growth, retention, employee productivity. There are wider ways that you can see whether the entire output of the business, but equally the software integration part is having an impact on the bottom line of the company and the goals. And so we've pretty much come to the end now. I hope what I've summarized for you is that it doesn't need to be an endless, where do I start? And that's really where we tend to help people. So start with what you know is what we're coming to here. Understand what you don't and build towards a goal to facilitate that gap. And so just to summarize some of what we talked about, so when we evaluate what we want to do, if we've got an endless question of how do we even start with your business goals, work to deeply understand your customers, and then investigate the technology landscape that exists out there already that your customers may or may not be looking at. Once you've evaluated what you want to do, you can then think about how you're going to do it. So be creative with your ideas when you're planning. Really, ideas are the kind of lifeblood of a good product. Maintain a clear vision of your goal. Make sure that you're working towards something concrete, and continually learn, test and ideate as you go. That should be a continuous cycle that we're never coming away from. And then, of course, measuring. So once we've got our plan in place, when we're putting it in place, making sure that we don't deliver it without measuring along the way. Develop small to learn quickly along the way. We want to record our learning as we go, really prioritize our efforts as we go along as well. And at all stages, understand the business impact. And having an idea of that at all stages is really important for everyone involved in the company. And so before I finally wrap up, I'll just hold there for a minute or two again for any questions on either measuring impact as we go, or of course, anything that we've talked about today. And again, while we're waiting, so it can be hard to know how much revenue, for example, is tied to an app rather than what we already have coming into a business. It's worth noting that a lot of the platforms out there these days, especially with apps, we can come back to apps, they're such a prevalent thing these days, but almost with any software solution, you can normally tie some form of revenue. The thing where it does get a little bit more difficult is with the more kind of aspirational things. So if you have a free app, for example, that's driving course signups within your company, you want to make sure that you capture things along the lines of why people signed up for that course in the first place. Did they come from the app to begin with? Was that the route in? So having those types of feedback systems, where did you hear about us? Those types of things can be a really interesting way to do that. And I think that's it. Thank you all so much for the kind feedback. I hope that's helped. And just to finish this one off, that's the wrong screen. There we go. Again, thank you so much. I appreciate all of your time for spending it with me today. I hope it's been somewhat helpful, or at the very least interesting. We do have a free PDF that basically has all of this and some more in terms of how you go from your idea to implementation in a PDF that you can download at the following URL. As always, I'm always available for a chat. I love hearing people's questions about software and technology. I think it's a really interesting way to really move companies forward these days. And I'm really interested about making it accessible for everyday companies. At any time, you can book a free 30-minute call with me. Again, at this URL here. Equally, I'm always on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me and grab some time with me there. Always happy for a coffee. And yeah, thanks so much again.